Welcome to The People I Play With. This is the show where I interview, well, the people I play with. I'm your host, Jesse Bernico. Hello, today's guest is Shaun Hayworth. How are you doing, Shaun?
I'm doing all right.
That's good. So, Shaun and I live at opposite ends of the state of California. I believe we met through Big Bad Con, and we've played a few games together, off and on. But lately, we've been playing the Blade Runner RPG. But before we get into the specifics of that game, I want to talk about you as a player in general. I want to know, what do you think your strong suit as a player is?
Man, that's not a question I was expecting. I tend to really like to play with genre, right? So if we're playing a fantasy game, I want to be all in on playing a fantasy game. Blade Runner is, a combination of my favorite dystopian cyberpunky kind of setting and a police procedural. So being able to look at it and be like, oh, these are the kind of characters that we're going to have. Just embrace it and treat it seriously and have fun with that. But I do my best, I guess, to try not to make it stereotypical.
Well, yeah, it's kind of what I think of as like authentic commitment to the material. So, reflecting on your play, is there anything as a player that you think you could improve?
I don't know. Sometimes, I don't always know the specific rule I need to have at the moment, or sometimes I lose focus. Those are generic problems. I don't think necessarily specific to me.
Are you saying sometimes you feel like you could be like on the ball a little better?
Yeah, yeah. I also think that that's a thing that like everybody would say that, right? I guess I could try to play outside the box a little bit more, but part of the fun for me is being in that box saying I don't know what I would improve sounds like a jerk thing to say.
No, it's actually one of the things that I like asking people because I don't think it's something we ask ourselves enough. Well, turning to the actual Blade Runner game, it's often said that failure in investigation games isn't very fun. And in this particular scenario we played, there was a lot of failures that took many forms. And a lot of these failures were the result of nasty runs of luck on the dice. But contrary to the myth of the dead end missing clue, it seems like you were never out of choices and options. And I'm kind of curious about, how did that avalanche of failure affect how you played your character Foster, especially in regards to keeping the investigation moving?
Yeah, that was interesting. And again, like I said I love playing with the genre. So at that point, I'm thinking, what are the things that I have seen where this kind of thing happens? So I start thinking of The Wire and all the times that McNulty pissed off the powers that be. Like nobody wants to play ball with him. So I think for me, there is a little bit of fun character stuff where here's a character that's supposed to have been on the police force that is corrupt. And this is just kind of how things go. At some point, somebody's gonna step on toes, and it's always gonna be somebody's turn to be the persona non grata in the department. And yes, this is frustrating, not in a fun way, but all of our progress or our choices have just worked out poorly for us. And having that fun of like, this isn't the first time this character has seen this. Uh and as much of a problem as it is for moving forward, it's also part of the genre, and you just kind of have to shrug and look for another way around or just accept it.
Yeah, and that sort of sequence of disasters sort of carried through all the way up until this horrible assassination happened. A major media figure was killed on live television that led to rioting in the streets, and there was kind of a point where your team kind of failed to prevent that. But I didn't get a sense that that was unfun or frustrating for you. That didn't like wreck the game for you. That you didn't feel like you'd failed, game over, we lost.
In pretty much any game, how you react in character and as a player to to failure, right, is where the most interesting moments for you and your character come in, right? Because then you have to deal with fallout. And it's fallout you don't necessarily have any control over. I shouldn't say no control. People talk to people and we have conversations if something's going to be way out of whack, right? But there's enough trust, at least with this table, because we all know each other. So we all kind of have that privilege of knowing kind of the thought process that happens on either side of the table, right? So we get to be like, look, we failed. Jesse is not going to screw us over here, but something bad is going to happen because we failed. You don't see characters really grow or rise to the occasion when you're succeeding all the time. It's fun to succeed. Succeeding feels like winning. Failure is when you get to like look at your character and be like, how is this going to change or cement some previously held idea, right?
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting because you brought up something that I want to talk about for a second, which is that you said we all know each other. I find it interesting that you really pick up on the idea that this game works and all the disasters that in it happened worked because we all know each other, and there's no reason for us to like have to like smooth things over with one another, or placate anyone's feelings.
There's stuff that you and me can get away with. We can push on certain buttons and know that we're all going to be okay. And if one of us crosses a line somewhere, A, it's likely to be inadvertent, and B, one of us will be like, hey, that's not working. Can we take that back and change it?
But the fact that you brought up that dynamic, um, I wanted to drill into it a little bit because I do think it's important, especially with how like bad things got in this game. Um,
It really did.
in fact, I want to zoom in on one particular disastrous moment for your character in particular. So, for context, there were these two replicants named Jean and Luna who were fighting on a boat in the ocean, and you were the only one who could reach them in your spinner. And I remember there was a distinct hesitation on your part to get involved, but you did get involved, and you did manage to incapacitate Luna, but not before she broke your leg. And from that point forward, you had to play a character who couldn't walk. So I kind of want to hear your thoughts on having to play a disabled character for like the last third of the game.
Yeah. I guess it's weird because I didn't think about it too hard, right? I didn't have that moment of like, what am I gonna do now? Can I continue to play this character? I was just like, he got injured in the line of duty. There's still stuff to do. I just know as a player, there are some things like getting in there and like shooting guns is going to be problematic, right? I just had to be like, well, if that kind of stuff comes up, I'm just gonna have to leave it up to the other two members of this group. Uh, but my mouth still works, right? All I need to do is fictionally justify how I can get from place to place, right? I have to be like, hey, could somebody help me get in there? Can a NPC patrol cop act as a crutch for me so that we can do this? And for me, that was a fun moment of like, here's somebody who wants to stick it to somebody. And there's kind of a lot of bluffery going on.
That scene was interesting too because you were actually serving an arrest warrant that you had worked very hard to collect evidence for. You can't walk. You're being carried in by this patrolman, and you're like, "I'm here to arrest you." In some ways, it's like the patrolman has to actually carry out the arrest because you're just kind of propped up in the corner.
Yeah, yeah.
And then after that point, if I remember correctly, you didn't even go to the hospital. You went to like the lab tech in the forensics department to like patch you up, right?
When you run into problems like this, the first thing that I do is I go to the rule book, look at like how does the game expect this kind of thing to be dealt with, right? I was looking up like, what are the rules for medical treatment, and it says in there you can go and pay your chinian points and go to an actual doctor or the hospital, but your LAPD, who have medical facilities in LAPD, it also just happens to be the medical examiner. So you're gonna go get patched up at the coroner's office, and I'm like, No, that's absolutely what he would do. 17 years on the force, he's not going to go to the cushy doctor. He's just going to go to the guy who will fix the problem.
It's interesting you bring it up because I don't think I quite caught in the moment that that was slightly rules motivated. And it was funny because the free thing did lead to a great scene. You're on the slab next to bodies that are being autopsied while some guy resets your leg. That's really interesting.
Yeah, the rules in general, like as far as I'm concerned, should be a tool for those moments, right? But also it fits, at least for me, what who Foster was, to just just go to the guy, have him fix your leg.
Well, speaking of Foster as an identity, I want to talk a little compare and contrast. So your character Foster is this veteran on the force, and he's pretty old. And one of the primary antagonists of this scenario was another Blade Runner named Tanner Smith, uh, who's also part of the old guard, but he was deeply corrupt. He was basically masterminding a series of false flag terrorist attacks to justify mass police violence against the replicant underground. So I want to know how you related to Tanner. In what ways you think Foster was and wasn't like him?
So when I think of Foster, and a lot of times I'm making this stuff up on the fly, right? I don't have a fully formed picture of who he is until a situation comes up, and then I take the moment to be like, okay, who's this guy? One of the things that I kind of had in my head since the first case that we did was there's a guy who is less corrupt and more compromised because being on the police force is inherently compromising. And that's my own personal attitude, right? I didn't want to make him like the quote unquote good cop. He's just a cop. This is what he does, and he's done it for a long time. And at some point, you become desensitized to it, right? But I think with Tanner, everybody has their tolerance for like, how corrupt are we okay with things, right? And also, uh, how much of that is directly affecting me. I think the thing that put these two characters apart is that Tanner was willing to get in other people's way for things. A lot of how I was approaching things was I was trying to do something, and sometimes cases get screwed up, but you, my dude, came in and stuck your nose in my business. I was trying to solve a murder case, and you made my job harder, right? Uh, and that was the impetus to find out that he was a much worse cop than Foster is, right? Because Foster isn't above using power to get what he wants, but I haven't taken a bribe in the game. Uh, I don't think that he's the kind of person that would take that kind of bribe, but only in retrospect, right? I think one of the conceits of a role playing game is that who that character is when you make the character is them at their most boring, and it's once you start playing that is the point in the story where they are starting to like examine themselves and go through changes, right? Uh, had to work a case with a replicant, and now he is slightly less racist. I wouldn't say he is reformed because he's cynical, and if it comes down to it, he's going to retire somebody, right? Because that's his job. But he's not going to go out of his way to use other cops as murder weapons, right? That's how I looked at it.
I think what I'm hearing from you is Foster almost has sort of like principled corruption. He's not going to commit war crimes in the pursuit of his job.
Right, right. It's ends justify the means thinking, right? If we need to beat a confession out of somebody, we'll beat a confession out of them. But if we don't have to, like, that's a lot of work.
So in some cases, had Foster very specifically in mind when I was developing Tanner, because Tanner was actually sort of present in the first scenario, and then I pushed his plans forward in this second scenario. Like when you say the ends justify the means, it's like, okay, well, any sort of ends sounds like Foster has some limits, right? As because Tanner was certainly doing the same thing. Well, if I have to fake terrorist attacks to get public opinion on my side, then so be it, right? Like
Right. Right. I think there's an element of decision making there, right? Maybe if the things Tanner was doing hadn't gotten in the way of Foster's case, right? Then maybe these answers would be different. Foster clearly didn't have to question these things until the moment they'd happen. So, from my perspective, that's happening for him at the same time that it's happening for me. And then I have to make a decision about what he's willing to do. Is he willing to be this person? Probably not. And part of that is I have two other players at the table, and I'm not interested in being totally antisocial. But my instinct is to punch this person in the face, but I have my friends here, and maybe they don't want to see me punch somebody in the face. So what do I do? How do I moderate myself? Like, what is okay here? I think it was interesting to be like, hey, here's a cop, and here's the kind of cop you could also be. Do you want to do that? Make a decision now. Who are you?
And that was somewhat intentional on my part. So it was interesting to see you almost immediately from the get-go go confront Tanner like one-on-one. So it was interesting to have that confrontation between, old guard and older guard. I feel like that was a pivotal moment that sort of set the trajectory of like the rest of what followed.
Yes, I agree. Because from that point on, a lot of what we were doing was look, we have this murder. We know he's involved. We don't necessarily know how or to what depth, but he also kept on our toes. And that's almost the greater crime. It became personal. It's what makes that neo noir police procedural interesting. We're not solving a whodunit. We're trying to get that guy, and hopefully we'll also solve the bigger crime. But really, we kind of want to get that guy.
I've definitely seen that in the two scenarios we've played. I've felt that the police procedural element where you kind of know really quickly who's involved. It becomes a very focused hunt rather than like a riddle to solve. Right?
Yeah. That's actually the thing that I've enjoyed about both of the cases.
I know that when sort of Blade Runner was announced, there were some people who felt it was just like going to be, slave catcher simulator. And I was very glad that I read it, that it highly emphasizes that's not what this game is. I mean, there's nothing stopping you from doing that if you want, but I think that's a very poor way to engage the material.
Yeah.
And so I think there has been nice tensions in both the scenarios we played. People are going to get hurt, and there's a lot of decisions on the player's end of who's that going to be.
Yeah. Yeah. I think one of the things that's interesting about Blade Runner, specifically the game, is that they make playing it as Slave Catcher Simulator a mechanically suboptimal choice. That because the way that I read the intent of how the game is constructed is it's fundamentally asking you in most scenes, hey, do you want to be a good cop here or do you want to be a good person? Do your job or be a moral human being. And those two are not the same because those are going to give you different rewards mechanically. If you focus on just one or the other, it is going to be mechanically suboptimal. So it's always going to put you in tension.
Yes. One of the things that I was a little concerned about when I read the text was that because you have these two split P systems, for lack of a better term, where you have the stuff that you get for being a cop and the stuff you get for being human, I was a little worried that those would sort of become this like little like checklist that like you would intentionally hit. But what I liked about our group is how that's been more of like post game reflection on like what happened as opposed to something people are actively chasing mid game. And I've appreciated that as a tool of reflection rather than a tool of guidance, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I always see those things as reflections on the session you just played, but then that informs the next session, right? Like you've done these things and been rewarded in this way. So the next time you play, you're not necessarily checklisting things, but you kind of have a heuristic, right? Given the things that I've already done, how do I want this character to behave? How do I want them to change? I can't think of a time when I was like, yeah, but I really want humanity points for this at the end of the game. So I'm going to do this. A thing that I think is a good skill for players to develop is like making choices and then justifying them afterwards. Actually, like I think reflects characters better than like knowing who they are and what they will choose at all times from the beginning.
I completely agree that sometimes there's this idea of like character logic, and people are a lot more impulsive than that, and the logic sort of gets retroactively filled in, I think, a lot more than maybe we're even comfortable admitting. I completely agree with you that like leaving that to the moment rather than, I don't know, turning your character sheet and looking at your backstory and looking for some derived behavior that should happen is a much more authentic way to play.
Yeah. When I picked out Foster from the lineup of characters, I was like, cool, old cynical cop, right? Like, that's it. That's my 3-word description of Foster Worth, 17-year-old veteran of the Rep Detect unit, right? That's kind of all I need. And then let that inform everything else going forward.
So at this point, I've been, asking you all kinds of things about how you reacted to various things in the game. So I want to ask you, do you have a question for me about the game that we've been playing?
I do. I am a fan of games that are heavy on structure. And so I'm really curious about places where like, the rule book doesn't necessarily give you all the information that you really need to make a good case file. I'm wondering what spots did you look at and were like, I don't think this is going to work for what I do, and changed it? Or if you had the opportunity to have some voice in Blade Runner Second Edition, what part of that structure would you alter to make the game work better?
So that's interesting because, yeah, I have this weird love hate relationship with the GM section. The thing that I definitely kind of altered, at least from the way it's described in the book, is that there is this sense that you're doing sort of a dungeon crawl across the city, and it might be nonlinear, but that it is all kind of funneling you towards a final confrontation. That there is sort of a planned climax, right? And tied into that as well, there's this perfectly fine mechanic, in my opinion, of the countdown. It's kind of the machinations of the NPCs sort of carrying out some sort of plan in the background. Some of those beats become obvious because they're like a terrorist attack. But there's some rhetoric in the book about changing the timeline based on the number of players. So it almost feels like this isn't an actual clock you're racing against. It's actually the narrative beats that are kind of supposed to happen leading up to that climactic confrontation, and you should shrink it or expand it to make sure it kind of all stays on pace so that the whole game sort of plays out the way you kind of expect it to. um, so in my case, no, I kept the countdown, but I kept it as I wrote it. Like it is an actual race against this clock, and if you stop it, you stop it. That happened in the first scenario. Like there were 4 or 5 extra beats on my clock that just never happened because you stopped them. And in this case, we ran at the end of my clock because you didn't stop them, and I had to add beats onto my clock. I treat the clock not as a pacing mechanic, but as an authentic thing you are racing against. I do like rolling on the random tables, and I do roll on the final climax thing, but I use that as inspiration for the final beat on the clock, not as this is where the dungeon crawl across the city is funneling you towards. Also, so there's a massive obsession in mystery games with clues. So there's this clue table you can roll on, and I have never found that useful except for maybe some opening inspiration. Like, oh, given there's a crime scene, let me roll here, and it's like, oh, there's some paperwork there. Okay, what could that be? But like, if I tried to roll on that table for every location, that doesn't fit with anything that's like going on. Clues are almost the wrong word. The correct word, in my opinion, is evidence. And there's all kinds of evidence that can be found, and if you actually understand how things went down and why, you can make those up as you're playing when the players go look at things, right? And I think there's this idea that the GM has to think through all the clues and all the evidence because that is tied into that sense of pacing. Like nothing can be solved too early, nothing can be solved too late. And if you just let that go, if you're just like, a crime went down, it happened this way, these are the plans of the players and what they're going to do in the future, and then just play the game, it will be fine. You do not have to worry about, do they solve it too early? Is it too hard? Will they make it to the climax at the right moment? Like all that management stuff just creates stress and anxiety that doesn't need to be there if you're just doing the GM version of what you were describing, just playing the characters in the moment that it comes up.
Right, right.
So, just to start wrapping things up a little bit, I wanted to ask you, okay, do you have a favorite, recent game memory?
Yes, and this is going to make me sound like a jerk. I've been running Band of Blades. One point, near the end of the game, there's a location that all roads kind of funnel you into. And when you get there, you discover that it's under siege, and you can't get into this location until you break the siege. And one of the enemy generals is on the field. Huge threat, right? And my players decided, well, like, we could take the opportunity to go and take out this massive threat. And they had already won. They had accomplished the mission. They sent in 7 people to go assault him, and 2 made it out. The reason I feel bad is because when this happens, I get gleeful because that is exciting, right? But that comes out as me being gleeful about having just killed 5 of your characters. It was a Pyrrhic victory because they made a poor choice. And that poor choice has affected the next couple of sessions because they had lost so many people in that one session. It was great. I do love to see players just fall to their own hubris. And I want to be their fan, but man, it's like, that's just such a good moment.
You can be a fan of their hubris. That's okay. So, one final question. Is there a game in your collection that you haven't had a chance to play, but that you really, really want to?
But I'm gonna kind of cop out because I've played it, but I've never played it to completion. It is a game that has always fallen apart every time that I've tried to run it or play it, and I really want it to work. And that is Burning Empires.
As someone who has run Burning Empires to completion, it kind of felt like the whole game, start to finish, was running on eggshells and could fall over at any minute. Well, I want to thank you for being one of the people I play with and for chatting with me today. I think this has been a very insightful conversation.
I have had a great time. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to The People I Play With. Please join me in 2 weeks when I interview Bree Seal about ghost hunting in the